All right, you did the anatomy of the eye. Now let's do the anatomy of the ears. In lecture, we've learned a little bit of this already, but let's go into some more detail. First of all, you know that the type of sensory receptor cell that allows us to hear is known as a mechanoreceptor. And mechanoreceptors, they will fire off an action potential when a mechanical force is detected. Mechanoreceptors can detect stretching or bending or being pushed on. The mechanoreceptors of your ear basically work off of sending out an action potential when they bend. And we'll see that at the very end. All right. You should know that the ear is divided up into three regions. That's pretty important from a medical point of view. The outer ear, starts out here with this stuff that you can see that is known as the auricle. It's also known as the pinna, the auricle. And this tube here, that gets called the auditory canal or the external acoustic meatus. The reason I wrote that way down there is it's got a third name, the external auditory meatus. Okay, so auditory canal, external acoustic meatus, or external auditory meatus. I accept all of those. Right? Now, this is the outer ear. The outer ear starts out here with the stuff you can easily see, and then it includes this part where you might place a Q-tip or get some water trapped in your ear. The outer ear ends at this fold of tissue that is known as the tympanum or the tympanic membrane. And I accept both answers, tympanum or tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane or the tympanum is the proper term for what regular folks refer to as your eardrum, right? An eardrum is actually not a bad mental picture to have of the tympanum because like the surface of a snare drum, the membrane is pulled rather snug and it makes a complete seal around the inside of the auditory canal. So any water that you get in here is stopped by the tympanum. You can't actually get water deeper inside your ear unless for some reason you've gotten a hole in your tympanum. So that's the outer ear. What's the job of the outer ear? The job of the outer ear is to collect sound waves, which are mechanical waves, which are particles of air bouncing against each other, to collect those and to focus them down here so they hit the tympanum and cause the tympanum to vibrate. All righty? Now, the next part is known as the middle ear. The middle ear. The middle ear is an air-filled space that also contains a little bit of liquid. This area right here is filled with air and a little bit of liquid. That air and liquid can only equilibrate, can only normalize its pressure by sending air or liquid down this tube. Now, this is important. You should know this, so make sure you write it down. That the eustachian tube is also known as the auditory tube. The auditory tube or the eustachian tube sends liquid to the back of your nose. It's actually a part of your throat. The back of your nose, throat area. One of the things that pretty much all of us have experienced at some point is when you go to a higher altitude, like when you just drive up into the hills, or actually sometimes when you just go up an elevator of a really tall office building, you will feel your ears pop. And what is that? When you go up in altitude, what's happening is the pressure at a higher altitude is lower than the pressure that you brought with you from sea level. And so this pressure here is pushing against the back of your eardrum. And when it gets to a certain point, it's designed to suddenly leave. I did not mean to do that. To suddenly leave through the eustachian tube, also known as the auditory tube. And when it does, you will hear a pop as the tympanum kind of snaps back into its normal position. If you were a kid like me who had ear infections when you were a kid, it's that middle ear that was your problem. Ear infections or ear aches when you're a little kid, they're not actually bacterial infections, generally speaking. Sometimes they're caused by viral infections, but the main problem is that a viral infection like a head cold, you know how it makes your nose swell shut so you can't breathe through it? Well, it'll make this tube here, this tube here kind of swell shut, okay? And when that tube there swells shut, that's a little bit of a problem. But you know how a head cold also makes your nose run? Well, that same virus can make extra fluid accumulate inside of your middle ear. And those two things together, the fact that there's extra fluid here and it cannot get out, means that fluid builds up in the middle ear and pushes on the tympanum and causes a lot of pain. I can still remember a really bad earache I had as a kid. All right, so let's go back to the outer ear. Auricle, and then the auditory canal, middle ear with the auditory tube, or you can use auricle with external acoustic meatus with auditory tube, or you can use external acoustic meatus with eustachian tube. Alrighty. One more thing about the middle ear. We're going to go into it in more detail. Inside the middle ear are 3 teeny tiny bones. They're as tiny as a hummingbird's foot, right? And there are 3 of them. We will learn their names in a later slide. The last part of the ear, you've got outer ear, middle ear. The last part of the ear is the inner ear. And the inner ear is where all of the mechanoreceptors sit. The inner ear has got this area that looks like a snail shell, all right? And the snail-looking thing is called the cochlea, and it's here that we get the mechanoreceptors of hearing. So that snail shell-looking thing, that is what you do your hearing with, right? Now, there are other mechanoreceptors in the inner ear, and those other mechanoreceptors give you your sense of balance up and down, and they are in a different part of your inner ear. You might wonder, where in the world is this inner ear found? And it's actually found in the temporal bone. Now, you might say to yourself, well, we've never seen anything like that yet. Well, yeah, you haven't. And the reason is that when you're just looking down at a skull, you don't see these things, because in order to see them, you'd actually have to take a bone saw and, you'd have to cut out some bone and pull off the bone so you could see the inner ear. And luckily for you, our labs have a model where you can do just that. All right, so now we're looking at a little part of the outer ear, the auditory canal, also known as the external acoustic meatus, also known as the external auditory meatus. We've got the tympanum, also known as the tympanic membrane. We've got the auditory tube, also known as the eustachian tube. Great, great, great. Now, I wanted to focus your attention here on the middle ear. Remember, the middle ear starts with the tympanum. It includes all of this, and the auditory tube drops fluid off in the back of your throat through that auditory tube or eustachian tube. And inside of that middle ear are three little bones, and together they are called the ossicles. So the three bones put together are called ossicles, but each one of the ossicles has its own name. Each one has its own name. The one that is attached to the tympanum is called the malleus, and the malleus looks like a mallet. I think that's how you spell mallet. A mallet is kind of like a hammer, and the malleus does look like a mallet. The second bone, you can't see it very well from this point of view. It is called the incus, and the incus kind of looks like a molar tooth. Like, imagine if this was a Halloween event and we just had like someone pull out a tooth with the roots and all. The incus kind of looks like a molar or a tooth. That's not what it was named for, but that's what it looks like. And the third bone is called the stapes. And the stapes looks like the stirrup of a horse's saddle. And that's actually how it got its name. It looks like a stirrup, and they thought it looked like a stirrup. And stapes, I think, is Latin for stirrup, so the stirrup. Now, one of the challenges is, how do you know which one is which? Okay, I've tried to describe what they look like, but here's another way to think about it. MIS. You don't miss this answer, okay? MIS, don't miss this answer. They are in this order: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Okay, they're in that order. Almost all of us can recognize the stapes because it looks like a stirrup. Stapes, stirrup, they've got three letters in common, stapes, stirrup, right? So you're going to get this one right? But these guys, you're like, is it incus, malleus, malleus, incus? Okay, we will show them to you in order, and they are in this order: MIS. So if you know that that's the stapes, you know that that's the incus and that's the malleus. The malleus, by the way, is the one that's attached to the tympanum. Right. So now let's look at the inner ear. The inner ear starts right here where the stapes touches the middle ear through an area called the oval window. So think about it, and you can see it on the lab model, but all of this delicate nerve stuff, all of that is encased in bone. There's a little tiny oval window that is kind of the window between the middle ear and what's going on there in the inner ear. And who's pressed against it? That foot part of the stapes. When sound comes down here, it causes the tympanum to vibrate. When the tympanum vibrates, these three bones, the auditory ossicles, they will magnify that vibration of the tympanum and turn it into kind of a pumping motion right here where the stapes meets the oval window. That's right on the other side there of the stapes. And that pumping action will cause a wave of fluid to go here out through the cochlea, and then it'll kind of wave its way on back. And when it hits here, the round window, that round window allows that wave of energy to die off. And what's going on in the middle, we will look at in more detail in a second. But before they do that, I want to make sure you know the cochlea, that is where the mechanoreceptors of hearing are found. So what's the rest of this? Well, this area, the vestibule, also has mechanoreceptors, and they're the ones that tell us up from down. The vestibule is the part that's most like what I described in lecture as being like a snow globe, and what your brain really knows is which way is down and your brain figures out up is the opposite way. So that's here in this fat part, the vestibule. And then we have got these areas, the semicircular canals. One goes this way, one goes this way. Wait, one goes this way, one goes this way. But one of them tells you whether there's a somersault. One of them tells you whether you're doing a pirouette, and one tells you whether you're doing a cartwheel. And you'll have a chance to look at that in more detail in the lab. Those semicircular canals, they give you your kinetic balance, knowing how is my body working in space. All right. So here is a close-up of the malleus, the incus, and there's our little stapes at the oval window. Here's a close-up of the stapes at the oval window, right on the other side there, right where this blue line is going to be. That's where the fluid inside of the inner ear begins, right? I am going to finish this up in another video.